What humanized someone you always thought was a jerk? My motherhead boss saved me from a firing after I crashed a machine when I was a new machinist. I heard it from another very cool older gentleman. I realized he had only been teasing me and actually liked me as an apprentice. I thought he hated me. I started teasing him back and we became friends. He understood I was poor and just starting out, so he helped me get all of my tools at discount. He just came off as a jerk with a mullet, but he was actually a good guy with a mullet. There was this girl at school who was an absolute snob in my eyes. She'd always be really loud-mouthed and abrasive towards people she didn't like. Well, one day I was walking towards the school and she was walking with this really disabled boy, talking to him calmly and holding his arm and leading him into the building. It was his first day in a new school and he had trouble speaking, but she made sure he was comfortable with walking down the hall with her first before she led him to his new class. I later learned this boy was her brother that was finally able to walk and go to school, and she really cares for him. She's a B towards people who bully her brother, I found out. My butthole boss's fiance was killed by a drink driver on her way home from a bridal shower with friends. He buried her on the day their wedding was to be. Ex-con broke down crying because a girl he dated left him, was pregnant and didn't tell him and put the kid up for adoption without telling him. Dude was almost bawling in the break room showing me pictures of him. One of my customers was an older woman. She was very particular about how she wanted her coffee. Very particular. It wasn't crazy, but just enough that when it was busy, she'd kill the line. Then I found out she worked at the methadone clinic. One of my co-workers went there once a week to get his meds. He would tell us about the people there, how horrible a lot of them were, especially to the staff. That's when it all clicked. Of course she's in a crap mood. She's going to work the front lines today. She's been doing this for almost 20 years. After that I started killing her with kindness. She wound up being one of my favorites by the time she left. She'd had a pretty sucky life. Oldest son was in prison for a while. She raised his kids, deadbeat ex-husband, etc. But the day she retired, she was grinning from ear to ear. She's since moved to the Pacific Northwest. I think of her sometimes, especially when I have a difficult customer. I've been on that ragged edge, where the few little joys you get for the day need to be absolutely perfect, or that little bit of disappointment is enough to send you over the edge and cause your full emotional collapse. One day working as a correctional officer, I saw a high-ranking Aryan break down in tears after a visit with his parents. I asked what happened. He found out his wife was pregnant by a guy that was also molesting his daughter. He blamed himself, saying if he hadn't been stupid and gone to prison his little girl would still be safe. Also saw another high-ranking Aryan happily playing with his biracial granddaughter. I asked how he felt about it. He said, "What do you mean? How can I not love her?" Years as a correctional officer, and there were many times when it was hard not to feel for the offenders. One of the cool skater kids in middle school was always a huge butthole to me. It was usually in front of a lot of people, so it always stung a lot more. Anyways, I had no idea, but his mom had been battling breast cancer, and when we were in 8th grade it took her. I saw him in the hall before class a few weeks later, and I don't know why, but I went up to him and told him I was sorry about his mom. He was really thankful for that, and we actually became quite good friends after that. I had a friend who was the typical B, always trying to prove how tough she was, like she was on a mission to be the alpha. Super annoying. I was talking to her one-on-one and she told me she used to be the complete opposite. She was in an abusive relationship and would never stand up for herself, and basically bowed down to this guy. After she left him, she realized everything that was wrong and was super mad at herself for letting it happen. So now she's constantly on high alert for people trying to take advantage of her. She thrives on confrontation because she used to be terrified of it. She needs to tone it down some, but I'd rather her be a B than a doormat. Finding out my super strict and rude district manager's 22-year-old daughter committed suicide. Well, you imagine having them as a parent. I knew a guy who I'd never really liked since I was in elementary school. Just kind of found him to be irritating and I couldn't talk to him for too long. Later on, we ended up working out together and he told me about a lot of the problems he was going through, including a really tough family life. It suddenly gets a lot harder to dislike somebody when you can't help but sympathize with their struggles. Once you understand what people really want, you can't hate them anymore. You can fear them, but you can't hate them, because you can always find the same desires in your own heart. She always seemed cold, distant, and terribly rude and bitchy, could be really mean. Then I learned that many years ago, she had given birth to a stillborn child. Shortly after, her partner committed suicide. She was left alone without the two people who held her together. I get it now. I feel for that girl. My partner miscarried and, even nearly 2 years later, it still hurts like heck when I think about it. There's this guy I know, mostly from parties, the bar scene. He's very good looking and charismatic, and I've always thought that he was a jerk who was totally full of crap all the time. His storytelling seems polished, and I always assumed he was using pre-canned stories and being insincere. One night my roommate invited him to stay at our house after a party, and all of us ended up really bonding over a bottle of tequila and a lot of mutual self-disclosure. After spending more time with him, I realized that all of his responses were so sincere that they didn't even seem real. I noticed that whenever he introduces friends to new people, he always has a super genuine, insightful compliment about the people he loves to use as an icebreaker. He is one of the best people I know. He's like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. So sincere it comes off creepy. I moved out of province when I was 12 to the east coast of Canada. I've always had a tough time making friends, but eventually met a group of girls that I got along with. But there was one girl who did not like me whatsoever, no matter how hard I tried or how nice I was. Now this part is a bit shameful because I definitely judged her based on her looks. She was partially black and she really intimidated me, not only because of her looks but also her demeanor. Keep in mind I moved from a small hick school to a large junior high where about a third of the students were black. It was so new and different, and like I said, this girl intimidated me, and she knew it. Before we were friends, she would totally ignore me when I was around or make comments about not liking me. I even had the bathroom experience where I was in a stall and heard her talking about me, like saying she'd beat me up if need be, etc. Well, eventually one night I think we drank or something and ended up talking. I learned she lived in the bad part of town in a dilapidated housing complex with her abusive mother and mother's BF. The boyfriend would touch her while her mom was gone. She made the mistake of bringing it up to her mother and got beat badly. She was constantly kicked out and abused. Besides her mother, she had no one. I started to understand why she was so angry all the time and hesitant to let new people in. After our night of chatting, it seemed to change everything between us, and she ended up being one of my closest friends for the remainder of the time I spent out there. She stood up for me when no one else would and was there for me when I needed it the most. It made me realize that even some of the toughest, meanest people can be big-hearted softies. I love when liquor brings people together. This is probably gonna be buried, but I had a gunny in the Marines that was notoriously an butthole. Just the meanest son of a bee I had ever known. Always yelling at everyone and treating everyone like an idiot. When we left for our second deployment to Iraq, I caught him limping as he walked up the gangplank to the ship. He clearly had been hiding a very severe injury for a long time. I just filed the knowledge away for a while and didn't think about it. Gunny continued to be a dong, but then one day we were called up as a quick reaction force and deployed into heavy combat. For a month solid I watched as our hated Gunny performed featuring after featuring of kindness to protect his Marines. I saw him give up all his water in 110-degree heat to his young Marines to keep them from passing out. I saw him give up his food when we ran low on supplies. It all came to a head when myself and several other Marines from my platoon got shot in an ambush. He picked up one of my friends like a baby in his arms. He was a giant man, and carried him 3 blocks to the evacuation vehicle and then set him down beside me and put his hand on his shoulder and looked into his eyes and told him everything is gonna be alright. Devil. I realized at that moment he had been playing a role the whole time. The Gunny is a mean guy. He screams and yells and makes people afraid. But at the end of it all, he was actually the most loyal and protective person. He would have died before he let his boys down. I later found out he had a torn MCL and had to retire because of the injury, but he refused to let it stop him from deploying with his boys. Sounds like a dang fine man. I should probably tell mine now that this thread is getting some more attention. In middle school, there was this dude that was a total D-bag. Popular and handsome bully type person. Never liked him as he always bullied the little people, my brother being one of them. Then one day in 7th grade, his best friend died in an accident. Not going to give more details than that because it got a lot of media attention at the time and could be easily found. He didn't come back to school for weeks. When he did finally return, he would only wear shirts supporting the charity that was created in his best friend's name. He was pretty depressed the rest of the year. It was really sad. It was then I realized people were more than just how they behaved in freaking 7th grade. I saw photos of them where they were genuinely happy. It became easy to let go of that hurt as it made me happy to see that someone, no matter who they are, was smiling so naturally and so purely. I feel like I hate Kanye West on principle. He's done so many stupid and bizarre and bad and tacky things. But whenever I see a pic of him smiling with his family I'm like, okay, no, I can't hate that. He looks so genuine and happy and nice and pure and kind of cute that I can't help but instinctively smile at it. Pretty much everyone that was too cool to talk to me in high school is super friendly now. Nothing has changed except now there's no social pressure to belittle others or be cool. A few people were still jerks but those were the guys who actually had behavioral problems. I've noticed this. A lot of the people who were too cool for me or even more popular than me seem politer and friendlier with me than most of the people I actually hung out with in school. Not all of them but a good chunk of them at least. One of our drill instructors told a recruit to climb a tree because he kept annoying him. The recruit asks how high and the DI tells him to keep going until he hits the top or he tells him to stop. The DI continues going over whatever the frick it was we were doing. The DI only remembers the recruit when he's off by 1 on the head count repeatedly. He pretty much lost his crap when he realized all of us were looking over his shoulder and followed our gaze to see the recruit 3-4 of the way up a 30-40 feet tree. This actually happened to me 2 weeks ago. I was working outside in the garden when my neighbor's son started drumming on some buckets again. Really large buckets. Noisy, annoying buckets. So I'm walking to my wall, fuming, about to yell at this little sucker killing my peace, when I see him. He looked like a 12-year-old professional, kicking butt on drums in front of a crowd of 1000s. But he was alone in his backyard, surrounded by a very crappy makeshift bucket drum set. I could see that he loved this. But as I'm watching him, his little drum setup falls apart. His head sank, his shoulders sank, and he just sat there, defeated. Then I remembered I got a small authentic bongo drum as a gift a few years back that was gathering dust in a closet, and went and got it for the kid. He excitedly thanked me for the drum and started playing almost immediately. Bonus points. The drum is slightly smaller than those acoustic demon buckets he was using, so the noise doesn't travel as far, and the drum sounds better than a bucket. I've been hearing him practice almost every day. He went from the annoying little butthole disturbing my peace to just a little kid, desperately trying to create something. It's all about perspective. I teared up. This loud-mouthed, obnoxious creep our work years ago discovered he lived in his truck working 2 full-time jobs to put both of his daughters through college and graduate school. They became wildly successful and visited him at work and doted on him. Nobody else really got along with him, but impossible not to respect the man. Had a VP level project guy who was often a loud jerk. One of the managers had a son in the military during Operation Desert Storm. VP level project guy actually broke into tears while expressing his condolences to the manager after the son was killed during the war. Years ago, I had a manager who cried when addressing stuff about an employee that passed away from unexpected, natural causes. He talked to the kid's father that morning. He was similar, loud, egotistical, and notoriously manipulative. It was powerful at the time, but I honestly still think he cried as a show. Maybe I'm too pessimistic. When I first started out at my job, there was a manager who was always cross with everyone. She made excuses and noticed reasons to write you up. I asked my best friend, who was related to her, about it, and she told me that her daughter was raped and killed on Christmas Eve 5 years ago. I remember the call when it happened, but it never clicked. Now, we are pretty close. Oftentimes, we smoke and talk about life together. She was expecting another kid last year, but I haven't heard from her in a while. I've had one bully in my life. I try to stay in the shadows. However, in first grade I had this girl who would not leave me alone. She was much bigger than me even then, and would try and push me around and constantly starting fights with me. I hated that bee until I moved schools in 5th grade. She is a bee. Cruel. Tried to kill my pet cockatiel at the time. Just horrible miserable girl. By chance we were sent to the same high school years later. I remember making eye contact with her my first day of history class and we just stared at each other a moment. No words. Before she looked away. I didn't. She was super thin now. Heavy makeup. Hair dyed black. Quiet. Who was this doppelganger of the girl who was ruthlessly mean to me? I know the family. I decided to Google them. Her dad was sent to jail about 6 years prior for aggravated child abuse. Physical and sexual. Tons of CP on his computer. Domestic abuse. And other sexual battery charges. I just sat looking at his mugshot, thinking, oh crap. This is why she was so mean to me. All the hurt from home was too much so she took it out on me. Honestly, I feel so bad for all the nasty thoughts I had for her. Not trying to be creepy. Hear me out. But I still check on her with a fake FB to see if she's okay. She's not. Strung out on M. Arrests for prostitution. B. I'm so sorry you went through that alone. I'm sorry I didn't see. I would have told my parents or something. I would have helped. I'm just sorry for everything that made you so shattered. Whoa. That's sad. A few of the kids who bullied me in school had what I now recognize as not so great home lives. I don't know the specifics, but when I looked back on certain things, I realized that the line that was handed to me about them acting on the hurt they felt wasn't just a line. A friend was dating a girl. She was gorgeous, had pretty friends but they all seemed super vapid. Just standard annoying party girl stuff. Nice to look at but not much else going on. Eventually come to find out the girl he's dating has taken care of her sister with brain cancer for like 20 years and she's actually a super sweet person. One of her annoying friends ended up donating an organ to save her father. Talk about judging a book by its cover. I was a jackass and completely wrong. Grade school. Kid was known as a hoodlum bully. 6th grade. Playing 2-touch football. My average Joe friend group versus athletic. Sports versed kids. He was on the other team. One kid decided to lay my butt out on a blindside block. Leveled me out. And my dumb butt tried to brace catch myself out of instinct. Broke 3 bones in my wrists. Right radius. Left radius and ulnar. And dislocated each wrist. Didn't notice until I tried to push myself off the ground. Too much pain. Rolled to my knees, saw my fricked up wrists. Proceeded to scream in shock. Every kid outside just freaking froze. Not the hoodlum kid. He saw everything and immediately booked it for the door to open it for me and guide me to the office. I couldn't talk out of pure shock, so I couldn't ask people in front of me to get the door. He was there for me. I felt awful for judging him. Really, he was a good kid. Nice guy. Unfortunately, I never got to thank him. And he died in a motorcycle accident in high school. This sucks to write. So this girl, not a bee but a real edgelord, she wore the blackest of clothes, constantly muled about how much she hates herself, was being really open about sexual stuff, really unapproachable, and ate really little. This is important. Turns out, her father abandoned her family, was sexually harassed at 13. This gave her both an eating disorder and borderline disorder, and she definitely has trust issues. I don't talk to her much since she's still unapproachable, but I want to give her a hug. She really needs one. Borderline is a personality disorder. You don't just catch personality disorders from an event. It pretty much means that it has always been there below the surface. It is not like eating disorders or PTSD and the like in this regard. I had a bully who was absolutely horrible to me freshman year of high school to the point of me becoming suicidal. I was at a graduation 2 days ago and saw him playing with a younger sibling and entertaining them through a really long ceremony. I still think he's a dong, but it really made me see him in a different light. My daughter is 25 now. Back in high school my daughter hung out with a badass Albanian girl. We'll call her A. They were good friends. A's family was nice to her. treated my daughter like family, got herself suspended and almost expelled for beating up another kid, not just fighting, injured the girl's face in a way that required weeks of healing. We'll call that victim S. Turned out S was beaten up for bullying my daughter daily, and unknown to anyone but A, my daughter was being governed by S, restricted from using certain doorways, stairwells, bathrooms. S usually had friends with her to back her up. My daughter was not afraid but was a pacifist. Better not to fight. One day S tried that with A. Bad idea. About 30 seconds into S attempting to dominate the corridor, the face beating began. The detached coldness, calmness, and brutal intensity of the beating frightened terrified S friends. They bolted. S sputtered through the beating, made apologies, promised to stop, begged for mercy. I told her oh no. Too late for that. The beating stopped when A got tired. Ambulance and police were called. There was no arrest, no charges. To this day my daughter does not know why. I never got the full story, only that they were lenient with A because she was a good student with good grades and no prior or subsequent issues of discipline or misconduct. Also S parents did not pursue action beyond the suspension. Just one incident set A off. The hallway dominion ended that day. I understood what provoked A. I still did not approve of her as a friend for my daughter, but I appreciated her loyalty and restraint nonetheless. In retrospect she was capable and chose her battles. As far as I know just that one. My mom's boyfriend is so loud, obnoxious, rude, overbearing, etc. And I always had such a sore spot for him. I could not stand being around him for more than a few hours, but he makes her happy. One night we went to dinner with this couple they are friends with and the husband was so vulgar and inappropriate. I was literally squirming and trying to actively pretend I didn't listen. His jokes included sex noises and cursing at the waitstaff, etc. My mom's boyfriend looked like a son in comparison, and I see him now as socially awkward but still a decent guy. I have such an appreciation for him now. I always thought my dad was an butthole, and he was verbally abusive. I was afraid of him for most of my life. Then I found out he has had tinnitus and PTSD pretty much since the time I was born. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps explain a lot of it. Andrew Jackson, who people blame for the Trail of Tears, believed that relocating the Indians was what was best for them. The alternative proposed by his opponents was outright war and extermination. Jackson adopted 2 Indian sons and signed over 70 treaties with various tribes over the course of his presidency. His personal life was also pretty rough. His father died before he was born, and his brothers and mother died during the war, leaving him an orphan. During his presidential campaign, his opponents would insult his wife and marriage, and she died before his inauguration. He ended up dueling and killing a number of people who had insulted his dead wife. I now have a newfound respect for the man whose face is on the currency I'm about to slip into a stripper's butt crack. I've told this story before on a different thread. There was this guy in my high school who would make fun of me and my best friend by calling us lesbians and always cheated on his girlfriends that he had. He was a few years older than me, so he graduated and I didn't see him again for about 2 years. I ran into him in town one day and he was pretty nice to me and we had a pleasant conversation, way more pleasant than he had ever been to me while we had been in school together. Later found out from someone that once he had gone to college, he came out as gay and his first boyfriend cheated on him, so he moved universities. I just assumed that he was overcompensating for his lack of ability to come to terms with his sexuality, and when his BF did exactly what he did to so many others, it really brought him down to human level. I went to a private boarding school that had a lot of small cabins that students lived in across their campus. One of these cabins was pretty large and had a couple of people in it, including this guy I'll call Jim, who was pretty much a major hassle. One day I was hanging out in the office and a parent showed up. It was Jim's mom, and she had driven up from to see him unannounced. A teacher who was handling the situation asked me go to Jim's cabin and let him know his mom was here to see him. I really didn't want to, but I liked the teacher, so I went anyway. When I got there, Jim was asleep. I woke him up and told him that his mom was there to see him. "What the frick does she want?" he said in such a way that I realized he didn't have a good relationship with his parents. She came up to announce their divorce. Didn't think Jim was in butthole after seeing what he had to go through. Honestly, Justin Bieber. He did a ton of really douchebaggy things. However, I would argue he was America's #1 most unfairly bullied and crap on person at the time. When he was just a kid, before he even did anything wrong, the main joke in pop culture was that he wasn't manly enough, and he was a late bloomer, so that made it worse. His life was essentially one giant haha, you're secretly a girl meme. People threw crap at him on his concerts, and he was the cool thing for the counterculture to hate and despise at a very young age. Toxic masculinity turned JB into a cockbag. I watched him on a late night talk show years ago, and after that really liked him. I never listened to his music. In the interview he was really well spoken and came off as a genuine person, and I liked it. We had a real jackass at work who would microwave fish in the break room and call us all buddy because he was too arrogant to remember our names. My opinion changed when I went out bar hopping with him. While the rest of us hit on women, he chatted up the bartender, doormen, bouncers and busboys. Swell, dude. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.